We begin, of course, with rising tension in the Middle East, now reaching Washington. President Trump slamming U.S. ally Israel, a rare rebuke for carrying out a deadly strike against senior Hamas leaders stationed in Qatar's capital yesterday. The group was considering a U.S. ceasefire proposal to end the war in Gaza. It's been going on for months. Loud explosions were heard in the city of Doha as smoke rose over a residential area that is also home to a number of foreign embassies. The unprecedented attack sparking rare public criticism of Israel from the Trump administration and putting those hostage negotiations at risk.
I will say this, we want the hostages back, but we are not thrilled about the way that went down today.
Unilaterally bombing inside Qatar, a sovereign nation and close ally of the United States that is working very hard and bravely taking risks with us to broker peace, does not advance Israel or America's goals. However, eliminating Hamas, who have profited off the misery of those living in Gaza, is a worthy goal.
All right, this comes after Israel ordered a total evacuation of Gaza City yesterday as it moves forward with a full-scale ground invasion. The fate of around 20 Israeli hostages still believed to be alive and some 2 million Palestinians hanging in the balance. NBC's Alice Barr joining us now with the very latest. Alice, good morning.
Sam, good morning. The White House says the U.S. military, not Israel, notified it of the Israeli strike and that the U.S. then told Qatar, but not in time to stop the attack. President Trump overnight voicing frustration with another escalation in the Middle East, an Israeli attack targeting Hamas leadership inside Qatar, that Qatar called cowardly and illegal.
I was very unhappy about it, very unhappy about every aspect, and we got to get the hostages back. But I was very unhappy about the way that went down.
The president saying Israel did not warn him in advance. On social media, the president writing, quote, unilaterally bombing inside Qatar, a sovereign nation and close ally of the United States that is working very hard and bravely taking risks with us to broker peace, does not advance Israel or America's goals. Hamas leaders were in Qatar because the U.S. asked for a neutral site for Gaza peace negotiations that Qatar has been mediating for months. Those talks now in limbo, devastating Israeli hostage families. One mother saying she's trembling with fear for her son, still captive in Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu authorized the strike after a shooting at a bus stop in Jerusalem Monday that killed 6 Israelis.
These are the same terrorists who planned, terrorist chiefs who planned, launched, and celebrated the horrific massacres of October 7th.
Israeli forces are once again stepping up military operations in Gaza, forcing beleaguered Gaza City residents to evacuate as President Trump and other world leaders push for a path to peace. The U.S. is pushing a new ceasefire proposal that Israel agreed to and Hamas was reviewing, though voicing skepticism about the terms. The White House says President Trump has now spoken to Israel's prime minister and assured Qatar's top leaders a similar strike will not happen again as we wait to see the fate of negotiations. Sam?
Alice Barr starting us off this morning. Thank you so much from Washington. Meantime, as the White House is contending with a crisis clearly in the Middle East, President Trump is attempting to distance himself from the evolving Jeffrey Epstein scandal. The president continues to deny that he wrote a sexually suggestive letter to the convicted sex offender more than 2 decades ago as part of a book compiled for Epstein's 50th birthday. That book was part of several documents released by Democrats Monday on the GOP-led House Oversight Committee. The president addressing the scandal last night to reporters outside of a restaurant in D.C. Take a listen.
It's not my signature, and it's not the way I speak. And anybody that's covered me for a long time knows that's not my language. It's nonsense. And frankly, you're wasting your time.
All right, he says it's not his signature. NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba joining us now from Washington with the very latest. Monica, great to see you. Thanks for being here. The White House continuing now to play defense when it comes to the Epstein scandal. That's nothing new. But during a brief phone call yesterday with NBC News, President Trump did call the investigation a, quote, dead issue. But the questions and the demands for the release of these documents obviously are not going to stop. So where does that leave things this morning?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Sam. This is an issue that the White House would prefer not to be talking about. But remember, it's the White House and the president and its allies that have been calling for more transparency, for more records to be released when it comes to the Epstein controversy. And that likely we can see more of that in the coming weeks that will raise more questions about whether the president did indeed sign this. As you're showing on your screen, again, the White House denies that. The president denies that. But it was a few months ago when the story first came out that the White House said the letter was non-existent. Of course, now it has been revealed. And the president has said that maybe somebody signed it for him. But you would have to then assume that that meant that more than 20 years ago, that's something that was done. And the White House has not at all provided an explanation for how that might work. But the president is now being asked specifically to talk about whether he would meet with some of the victims, some of the people who survived Jeffrey Epstein's abuse. Here's how he answered that question when he was out last night.
Will you meet with the Epstein victims? Do you plan to meet with?
I don't know about, nobody suggested that.
But would you be open to doing that?
Certainly I don't like that whole situation with respect to anybody being abused or hurt, but I haven't even thought about that.
Now, it is the victims and some of the family members of victims that have raised, again, this idea that their voices should be more included in the entire coverage of this and in this story, and they have been more outspoken. So that is something that the White House now may have to answer for, Sam.
Indeed. And those families have been asking for more transparency as it concerns the release of these documents, too, Monica. So it's now been more than 24 hours since the House Oversight Committee released some of the records related to an Epstein following a subpoena to his estate last month. The president continues to say, again, it wasn't his signature on the card that he allegedly wrote. What else are we learning from the release of these files?
Yeah, and remember, when it comes to his signature specifically, if you look at correspondence that has been released, because remember, Donald Trump, the citizen before he became the politician, was sending so many different letters to so many different people who have at that time released now what it looks like and compared it. And there are many that do seem to match, again, seemingly this signature that's there that the president denies. But the White House is also now actually answering in an interesting way in terms of saying that they are talking about this whole narrative being what they're taking issue with. But yesterday, the White House press secretary Caroline Leavitt said, we don't believe that the documents necessarily are a hoax. So they're saying perhaps this is something that really did exist. But again, they're arguing that somehow someone else would have written this and attached Donald Trump's name to it. But in terms of what these documents are also raising questions about, Sam, remember that this is something where the president has talked about his fallout, the fact that his relationship broke down with Jeffrey Epstein all those years ago, specifically because he liked young women. That is what Donald Trump has said. And because he specifically hired away some people who worked at Mar-a-Lago. And so there are still questions, again, about what was known exactly at that time, about what Jeffrey Epstein was doing, what Donald Trump knew. And those are the questions that just remain persistent as more information comes to light.
Yeah, no sign of them going away. I want to pivot for a second as well, Monica. Some pretty big news overnight. We learned late last night that a federal judge had temporarily blocked President Trump's efforts to fire Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook. Can you walk us through that decision and what it actually means moving forward?
It means right now that she can technically stay in her role. And we know that there's an upcoming important meeting of the Fed that it seems, given this court order, she could participate in. But we also know from the White House and from their legal strategy that they will continue to pursue this and appeal this. And then, of course, this could go all the way up to the Supreme Court. And then this could be reversed. But the whole backstory, and to remind everybody here, is that the White House alleges that there is mortgage fraud here and that would be cause to remove her, to fire her from her position. That is what the president has said. But some of the details about that, Lisa Cook herself and her attorneys have rejected and denied, saying that that is not true, that that is not accurate, and that that is not grounds for her removal. So that is why they did file that lawsuit. But again, the White House says they will continue to pursue this. The timing, Sam, is a question. It depends on how long it could take for a higher court to potentially overrule this or to overturn this. And then again, we're stuck again in this question of whether she can continue this term, of which she still has years remaining.
Yeah, a lot of topics to cover this morning. Monica Alba starting us off. Thank you so much. Well, as the White House continues to deny that President Trump drew that sexually suggestive note to Jeffrey Epstein, we're now hearing directly from his victims. NBC News Now anchor Hallie Jackson speaking one-on-one with Liz Stein hours after the release of the so-called birthday book. Here's a part of their conversation.
What was your reaction when you saw that birthday book, Liz, the images in it? Well, I think it's important for people to understand that the birthday book was produced by the Epstein estate. So it's coming right from the source. And I think that we should all take a close look at some of the messages in there. They were extremely familiar and intimate. And I think that we're looking at a pattern of behavior with Epstein and some of his friends that has been going on for decades. And this birthday book is just more proof of that.
One member of Congress suggested, though, that its release was a, quote, distraction from the work of trying to find justice for the victims. As a survivor yourself, I wonder, do you see it as a distraction, or do you think it could be a helpful tool moving forward?
I think that that all evidence that we can uncover is helpful. And I think that, if anything, this book shows us, like I said, what his personal relationships were like, what the tone was that he had with close friends, and just kind of the general mindset that Epstein and his friends had is really blatant in this birthday book.
You know, I look at the family of Virginia Roberts Giuffre, who also released a statement today, Liz, and I know that you know them, suggesting that this was perhaps a turning point, although it obviously is in so many ways bringing back up the trauma for so many.
I think it's important to validate the fact that we're feeling two things at once right now. This is incredibly traumatizing for us to have this ripped open again, and for us to have to revisit this and see this on the news and in popular culture every day, everywhere we go. But on the flip side of that, I think that we're all encouraged that the estate is finally turning over some documents, because more than our discomfort in reliving this trauma, we want to see justice. And we are willing, as survivors of this crime, to do whatever we have to, that without putting ourselves in danger, to really get to the bottom of this. And so I think that we are encouraged by anything new that's coming out.
What is your message, Liz, to Americans at this moment here, with the spotlight on the Epstein case, with the release of these documents, with congressional members, including the head of the House Oversight Committee, promising to release more documents and seeking to look into, for example, Epstein financials? I
think that uncovering the financials will give us a lot of information. And I think that we are, as a country, we are perhaps getting swayed because this is being turned into a political issue, and it's not a political issue. This is a crime, and the crime is sex trafficking. And if we had this crime happen in our communities, if we had a crime in our communities that had 1,000 victims, I'm sure everyone would be screaming for justice. And if I can impress anything on the American people, it really is that this has been going on through 5 administrations of all different political persuasions. And this current administration ran on the promise that we were going to find answers. And so to politicize something that is just a crime is really appalling to all of us.
And our thanks to Hallie Jackson for that candid conversation. Democratic lawmakers and a handful of Republicans on Capitol Hill right now are working to gather congressional support that could ultimately force a vote over whether the Justice Department has to release more Epstein files. Well, to the economy now, and a new report that's offering a worrisome glimpse into the overall state of affairs. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the number of jobs created between April of 2024 and March of this year is now being revised downward by 911,000. NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans takes a closer look at what this all means.
31-year-old Fatima Gill is all too aware that the jobs market isn't as strong as many Americans had thought.
There are nights where I just cry myself to sleep.
Gill lives in Cleveland and was laid off from her operations job at a marketing and advertising firm back in March.
I really don't know what to do anymore.
She says she's had dozens of job interviews with no luck.
Did you ever think 6 months later you'd still be looking for a job? All of me, my friends, my family were all surprised that it's been this long at this point. I had a better luck during the pandemic finding a new job than I do now.
Her struggle reflecting signs of slowing in the job market.
This may be the biggest revision ever.
New Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers showing 911,000 fewer jobs were created from April 2024 to March 2025 than previous reports showed. a routine update based on new data showing the growing challenge of getting an accurate picture of the jobs market. JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon.
I think the economy is weakening. Whether that is on the way to recession or just weakening, I don't know.
The White House press secretary using the numbers to justify firing the BLS commissioner just last month and to place blame on the previous administration.
This makes it very clear that President Trump inherited a much worse economy by the Biden administration than ever reported.
Fatima Gill more concerned about her unemployment benefits ending in October, now worried she'll have to move back in with her mom.
It is scary. Because it's not in your own control. It's in the control of the economy. What kind of helps me is I'm not alone in the sense of I know other people are experiencing very similar things to what I'm feeling.
The president has been calling for the Federal Reserve Chief Jay Powell to cut interest rates for months now. In fact, the Fed next meets next week, and it could be the Fed is more likely to cut interest rates in light of a weakening labor market. That said, there's more inflation news on the horizon. Inflation data, consumer price index, is due on Thursday. Again, more information for the Fed to consider as it balances whether to support the labor market by cutting interest rates or to keep interest rates steady and not inflame inflation. Back to you.
An important decision coming up. Christine, thank you so much. Well, the Trump administration has unveiled its latest Make America Healthy Again report, billed as a roadmap of sorts to tackling chronic illnesses in kids. This is the second installment, dubbed the Make Our Children Healthy Again strategy report, which is a follow-up of HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s initial assessment that was released back in May. It aims to highlight better nutrition, more exercise, and review of vaccines and drugs. Public health experts say the plan is long on ideas and short on meaningful action. NBC News medical contributor Dr. Natalie Azar joining us now to further this conversation. Dr. Azar, good morning. Thank you for being with us. So this is the second installment of this MAHA report, right? So it's intended to build off of the original assessment. First of all, most basically, what's in it?
So I think the report really wants to highlight a couple of different pillars of children's health: food and diet, activity, chronic stress, over-medicalization, and chemical exposures. I think the biggest takeaway from the report is that, sort of how you said in the intro, these ideas all on their face sound great, but the question of exactly how they're going to be implemented, what regulatory actions are going to be taken to achieve those goals, how these goals are going to be financed, was really kind of missing in this report. And I think most importantly, there were a lot of red flags for many public health experts, and myself included, and those include questioning fluoride in drinking water, researching autism, and of course, the biggest one is the vaccine issue. And a lot of this, again, stems from, RFK's confirmation bias that he's going to be bringing to this report. Is he going to get to the end that he wants to see?
Because it goes without saying that access to good information about nutrition and regular exercise for children, I mean, of course, these are important components of a healthy lifestyle for kids. But you're saying there's nothing actionable in there that necessarily jumpstarts that. While the broader conversation around RFK and what he's doing right now at HHS and with the CDC specifically has to do with allowing vaccine science that has been corroborated over the course of generations to continue. And that seems to be in question right now. Is there anything in the report that gets into that aspect of his time?
It does. And I think that again, for us on sort of the front lines and the people who are giving guidance to patients and to parents about vaccinating their children, talking about exploring and building a firmer sort of framework to evaluate what they refer to as vaccine injury. None of us really like that term. We know that vaccines can have side effects, but that kind of language continues to sort of foster this mistrust in vaccines. And also cloaking the conversation about vaccines in terms of medical freedom. To us, that rings again of this idea that this civil liberty and choice around vaccines is going to potentially threaten, as you mentioned, one of the most important frameworks for keeping our children safe, and that is vaccines.
So that framework, how we have this conversation, at least from the government guidance standpoint, is still very much in flux.
Yeah, and I think, again, to talk about the sort of conflict in terms of what they're talking about and what's actually been happening with the administration. If we're talking about access to healthy food, and yet SNAP benefits are being significantly reduced and millions of people are being cut off from Medicaid,
Yep.
how are they going to access those healthy foods? I think that's what's troubling us.
And we were having this conversation earlier, and it may surprise some folks to learn just how many children are dependent right now on access to Medicaid and SNAP benefits, which have been cut. It's a lot of kids, right?
It's a lot of kids. It's about half of the U.S. population of children is actually on Medicaid. So all of those kinds of governmental services are really at risk and they're in jeopardy. And so, you know, we can all sit here and say that it's important to have healthy food, but if you can't afford it, it's going to fall on deaf ears. Another big one here, Sam, too, was about, you know, chemical exposures and yet regulation on the EPA. Not what a lot of people wanted to see. So I think we're going to see that a lot of these things are going to be motivated by industry, and that won't surprise any of us.
And the contradictions sort of continue in this report. Dr. Azar, thank you so much, as always. Appreciate it. Well, this morning, Missouri is the latest battleground in the fight for control of Congress. Republicans in the State House of Representatives there voted 90 to 65 yesterday to pass a bill that redraws the congressional maps in their favor. We're again now talking about Missouri. The bill now heads to the state Senate for consideration at a special session later this afternoon. A new map could be on the governor's desk by the end of the week. Now, the plan is backed by President Trump, and it follows a pretty similar controversial playbook from Republicans in Texas last month, you'll recall. NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster joining us now from Missouri's capital, Jefferson City, with more. Shaq, let's talk about this vote. A handful of key Republicans actually voted against their own party on this. Walk us through what happened at Missouri State House yesterday.
Well, Sam, it was definitely a long day yesterday, and you mentioned there were 13 Republicans who ultimately voted against this legislation, including the Speaker of the Missouri State House, who didn't like the impact that some of the redrawing of lines had on other districts. But in the end, this is a bill that passed fairly easily. Republicans say that these new maps essentially better reflect Missouri's conservative values, and they have the intention of at least adding another Republican to their congressional delegation. Democrats, on the other hand, say that this is essentially a power grab, that this is not something that is usually done in the middle of a decade, and this is essentially Republicans just following the orders, in their words, of President Donald Trump. President Trump, by the way, last night posted on Truth Social congratulating Missouri's lawmakers and saying that he's watching this as this goes to the Senate. He's saying he's watching it very closely.
Shaq, can you sort of break down the framework of this conversation with respect to how Democrats have countered, and specifically in California, right, where they have the most real estate to work with? But I know Governor Newsom has gotten a measure that's going to be on the ballot here, but voters still have to approve it for California lawmakers to be able to move forward with redistricting to counter. So that's going on. And at the same time, now we're talking about Missouri. How does this bill actually change that state's map?
Yeah, you're seeing these redistricting wars that are happening across the country becoming the focal point now here in Missouri. What lawmakers here do is they change the 5th congressional district, which is the Kansas City area. You're seeing it on your map right now. It's held by longtime Congressman Emanuel Cleaver, and they essentially divide Kansas City's voters into 3 other congressional districts, more rural districts, more conservative districts. The point that you hear from Democrats is this is of voters in Missouri's most populous city, and it's having an impact on minority voters, they say, in particular. I want you to listen to my conversation when I brought that point up to the bill's sponsor. One of the points that you hear from opponents is that this essentially dilutes the power of black voters. Does it?
Yeah, I think that's the premise of that's a little insulting to Congressman Cleaver, who's represented that district in a variety of forms and at points including a lot of rural area, not necessarily at this moment in time, because he does not represent a minority-majority district as it is. And he's represented that district faithfully in Congress. They've continued to elect him, and they might still continue to elect him.
Bottom line here is that both sides acknowledge that this map was drawn with the intention of adding a Republican, sending an additional Republican and one less Democrat to Congress once we get past the 2026 midterm elections.
Yeah, it's pure politics, right? Everyone seems to be pretty much on the same page about that, Shaq. Can we also talk strategy here? When Republicans in Texas introduced their redistricting bill a few weeks ago, Democrats fled the state for weeks to try to delay it. Ultimately, that new map still passed once they returned. So do Democrats in Missouri have anything up their sleeves to try to stop this from moving forward?
Well, Sam, in the House, they were completely restricted from doing that simply because they didn't have enough members to leave the state for in a way that could stop the business from moving forward. But in the Senate, there are different tools that Democrats have. I talked to a state senator right around the time this bill was passing about this. Listen to what she told me.
What I can tell you is that we are going to fight tooth and nail with everything in our rules and our procedures to stop this. I think one of the most important things that we can do is bring other like-minded Republicans with us. We saw in the Missouri House that this did not pass on a party line vote. We are hopeful that we can do the same in the Senate.
You hear them talk about delaying and having a talking filibuster, but I can also tell you there are lots of protests here scheduled for later today, Sam.
Shaq, thank you so much. We'll see what voters think about all this as well. Appreciate that. In other political news, an expected win for Democrats gives the party another seat in a narrowly divided House of Representatives. As we're talking about the congressional maps here, NBC News projects that James Walkinshaw has won the Northern Virginia's deep blue 11th congressional district. That seat had been vacant for months following the death of Congressman Jerry Connolly. That was back in May. Walkinshaw spent a decade as a top aide to Connolly. During his campaign, Walkinshaw leaned into criticism of President Trump's cuts to the federal workforce, and that win leaves Republicans with now just a 6-seat edge in the House. And NBC News can also project that Boston Mayor Michelle Wu and challenger Josh Kraft will be the two to move on to November's mayoral election. They secured the most votes in yesterday's preliminary election. The two candidates with the most votes, irrespective of political party, move ahead to the general election. Wu is aiming to win a second term in City Hall after becoming the first woman and person of color to be elected as Boston's mayor back in 2021. Well, there are new details to get to from the investigation into that deadly condo building collapse in Surfside, Florida, back in 2021 that killed 98 people. Investigators determined that the structural failures that led to the collapse likely started in the building's pool deck rather than in the tower itself. That is according to a report, years-long report here, from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, ultimately released yesterday. The collapse of the 12-story building happened in the middle of the night in June of 2021. Officials say the condo had been experiencing issues in the years leading up to the collapse. The report revealing that faulty construction, structural damage, and corrosion were identified in a prior inspection. At this point, no one has been held responsible. Now, a Dubai-based developer is building a luxury condo complex in its place, with prices starting at $15 million. It is expected to be completed by 2029. Staying in South Florida on a very different topic here. Heavy rain showers expected to continue there today. We've got more details with your Morning News Now weather and meteorologist Angie Lastman joining us with, I guess, an active radar over your shoulder. Good morning, Angie.
Indeed, Sam. Good morning to you. We've got another day where you need the umbrella handy if you live anywhere across really the state of Florida, specifically the southern tier of the state. That's where we're going to see the most active kind of pattern develop as the day goes on. Right now, we're looking pretty good. A couple of these showers, maybe a few thunderstorms working in just north of Fort Myers. Otherwise, everything offshore for now. I say for now because we're going to start to see some of that daytime heating get going, and we've got plenty of moisture to tap into, and we've got this kind of front draped across the state. That's just going to hang around through the day today. So basically, we have all the instability we need to see some of this rain get going. Now, the caveat is we could see some high rainfall rates with this. We saw the same kind of pattern yesterday, so additional rainfall on already saturated grounds really doesn't take much to see flooding occur across this region, and that's what we're concerned about here as the day goes on. It's not just today, it's tomorrow too. A little bit of movement with that front, but it's going to be a slow mover. We're still going to have plenty of energy to tap into, and the areas of heavy rain are going to be mainly focused over, again, the southern half of the state. So here's what we got for the flash flood risk today. That slight risk really stretching from just south of West Palm, so really Fort Lauderdale area to portions of South Miami. We're going to see those slow-moving storms focused into the afternoon hours, and at times, those rainfall rates anywhere from 1 inch to 2 inches per hour. By the time we get through Friday, because remember, this is going to be multiple days in a row, we could have the potential for multiple inches of rain, up to 3 inches of rain. Again, flash flooding will be a concern, especially on those areas, if you live in this region, the areas that you often see flood in just a single rainstorm. Now, we've got a different kind of flooding concern up and down the East Coast. We've got coastal flooding. So we're kind of sandwiched between a high and a low pressure along the East Coast. And we still have tides a little elevated from Sunday's full moon. That means we've just got really strong onshore winds shoving all that water up against the coast. So we do have a concern for some inundation, about 1 to 2 feet up and down the mid-Atlantic coast and stretching down to the southeast coast, Sam. So flooding for Florida, flooding for the East Coast. We're going to be watching flooding today.
There is a consistent theme, at least.
Indeed.
I will say the fall weather, though, for so many folks has been amazing. If we can just bottle this up and just hold on to that.
My feeling is it never lasts long enough.
No, it doesn't.
Fall and the spring never last long enough.
Pretty much a guarantee.
I'll do what I can.
Thank you, Angie. Appreciate you.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.